She called me worthless. One word. Sharp, loud, and meant to cut. It sliced through the busy restaurant like a hot blade through thin plastic. Before you begin, take a moment and imagine being abandoned by the very people you loved. Now join me as I finally take back what they stole. Stay with me, you need to hear every word of this. I stood near the entrance, still holding my coat, the cold winter air brushing against my back every time the door opened behind me. It was 12:37 p.m., the peak of the lunch rush, when my sister decided to humiliate me in front of two servers, a busboy and a table full of customers who pretended not to stare but absolutely were. The smell of grilled onions and buttered rolls hung thick in the air, mixing with her arrogance like a bad perfume. She didn't even look up from the order slips in her hand when she said it. Worthless people show up without calling. Don't you have anything better to do? My fingers tightened around my coat. But I kept my face calm, soft, almost apologetic. The kind of expression she had trained me to wear decades ago. I didn't flinch. She wanted me to. Instead, I took one slow breath and placed my coat over my arm. It's been a long time, I said quietly. She finally lifted her head. For a split second, a tiny flickering moment, I saw something behind her eyes. Fear? Guilt? No, she would never admit either. But her gaze darted to the back hallway for just a moment too long, as if she was hiding something back there. Interesting. I stepped fully inside the restaurant and the door shut behind me with a soft click. The warm air swallowed me whole. Clinking plates, soft jazz, and the low hum of conversation surrounded us like a stage being set. And she, my own sister, stood at the center of it all, pretending this empire was hers. I walked in deeper, taking slow, deliberate steps. My eyes traced everything quietly, secretly. The cracked tile near the front counter. The stain on the ceiling above table 7. The tired expressions of the staff. Small details. Unsettling clues. Evidence of someone drowning in responsibilities she hadn't earned. What are you looking at? She snapped, suddenly defensive. Just everything, I replied. I let the words hang vague but heavy. She frowned, sensing something she couldn't name. A younger server, the girl with braided hair who used to smile at everyone, avoided my eyes as she carried a tray toward the kitchen. Even the chef, a tall man with a stained apron, kept glancing at me from the pass-through window with a look I recognized instantly. Concern. Not for me. For her. My sister smoothed her blouse, straightened her shoulders and forced a smirk. You came to visit the restaurant? Or to make trouble? I smiled gently, the way women my age learn to smile when they want to avoid unnecessary drama. Neither, I said softly. I just wanted to see the place. She laughed, too loud, too sharp, to cover whatever unease my calmness triggered. Well, you've seen it. You can go now. But I didn't move. Instead, I took another step forward and ran my fingertips across the wooden host stand, the one she replaced years ago after throwing out the original I painted myself when we first opened. The wood was chipped. It didn't match the decor. A bad attempt at impressing people who didn't care. You changed things, I murmured, still tracing the surface. Obviously, she said. I improved it. Improved? If she called this chaos an improvement, then she was in deeper trouble than I thought. A couple at a nearby booth whispered to each other. I could hear faint bits. Is that her sister? I heard they don't get along. Didn't she used to run this place? So people remembered. Good. My sister walked toward me, heels clicking like little warnings across the floor. You're making customers uncomfortable, she hissed. No, I replied quietly. You are. She froze. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't insult her. Didn't react the way she expected. I simply looked around. The crooked specials board behind the counter. The flickering light above the register. The stack of paper menus with corners curling from moisture. Signs of neglect. Signs of shortcuts. Signs of slow collapse. And one more thing. Something she probably hoped no one would notice, but I did instantly. The vendor invoice sitting half hidden under the napkin dispenser. I saw the red stamp through the paper. Past due. My heartbeat slowed. Not from shock but from confirmation. She saw my eyes linger on the invoice and snatched it up like a child hiding a bad report card. You don't need to see that. But I did, I said softly. Her jaw tightened. She took a step closer, too close, her perfume sharp and cloying. Why are you here? she demanded. I shrugged. Maybe I missed the place. She scoffed. You missed being in charge, you mean? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because she wasn't really asking me a question. She was confessing. I looked past her toward the kitchen, where a young dishwasher was wiping sweat from his forehead and shaking his head at a clogged sink. A second server rushed out with 2 plates, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the garnish. The chef shouted for more supplies they clearly didn't have. The whole place felt tense, frayed, held together by tape and denial. But my sister pretended everything was fine. How's business? I asked gently. He stiffened. Busy. I raised an eyebrow. Busy is good. Yes, she snapped. We don't need your concern. Her voice cracked on the word need. Just a hairline crack. Almost invisible. But I heard it. And so did she. Before she could recover, the front door swung open and a delivery man stepped in with a clipboard. Susan, he said loudly, we need payment before we drop anything else off. Last week's bill is still unpaid. My sister's face drained of color. And she made a mistake. A big one. She glanced at me. Just for half a second. But she looked at me. As if I was the reason. As if I was the threat. But she didn't know the half of it yet. The delivery man followed her toward the counter, talking too loudly, complaining about unpaid invoices. The kitchen staff exchanged uneasy glances. Customers looked up from their meals, sensing tension. And I stood quietly, absorbing every detail. She tried to lower her voice, but the panic in her tone carried across the room anyway. I told you we'll pay, just give me another week. No, 2 days, please. The man sighed. Ma'am, we've been patient for months. Months. Interesting. She returned to me with forced confidence, chin raised like a crumbling pillar holding up a collapsing roof. Some people can't do their jobs properly, she muttered. Ignore him. But I wasn't ignoring anything. Not her panic. Not her lies. Not the cracks spreading beneath her feet. I leaned slightly closer. You seem overwhelmed, I said gently. She spun on me, anger exploding. I don't need your pity. Her voice boomed across the dining room, louder than she intended. Every single customer looked up. Silence fell over the restaurant like a heavy curtain. And she realized too late what she had done. Her eyes darted around, then locked on mine with pure resentment. You think you're better than me? You think you know something I don't? I lifted one eyebrow. I know a few things, I said calmly. She blinked. Once, twice. She heard something different in my tone. Secret. An advantage. A hidden card she didn't know I had. What's that supposed to mean? She whispered, voice trembling. I didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, I slowly placed my hand on the door frame. The same spot she tore from me years ago. When she stole this place piece by piece. I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. Hard times are coming. She swallowed hard. For the first time in years. She was afraid of me. I saw it. Felt it. Tasted it in the air between us. But before she could ask anything, a plate crashed in the kitchen, breaking the tension around us. Someone shouted about another leak. The delivery man returned, asking again for payment. A waitress wiped tears from her eyes as she hurried past. Everything was breaking. Not because of me, but because of her. She tried to act strong, but her voice shook. You're lying. You're trying to scare me. I stepped back, giving her a calm, almost sympathetic smile. No, I whispered. You did that to yourself. Her mouth fell open. She tried to speak again, but no words came. And I left her standing there, speechless, shaken, terrified. As I walked out the door without looking back. Not yet. Not until she understood. That the woman she once called worthless was holding a secret she could never escape. Her stunned face stayed with me long after I walked out of the restaurant. The sound of her voice, cracked, trembling, trying to mask fear beneath anger, followed me like a faint echo as I stepped into the cold afternoon air. I didn't rush. I simply wrapped my coat tighter around my shoulders and walked toward my car with the same quiet steadiness I used to survive the last decade. By the time I reached home, the winter light had faded into a dim, bluish gray. The living room felt colder than usual, not because of the thermostat but because her words still clung to me like frost. I hung my coat on the same wooden hook my late husband installed years ago and stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was awake. For the first time in years, something sharp moved inside me, a mixture of memory and instinct. The way she'd snatched that past due invoice, the fear behind her forced smile, the delivery man's frustration, the waitress wiping tears. Something was unraveling in that restaurant and she was desperately trying to hide it from everyone, including herself. I walked into the small room I called my study, the one I rarely used anymore. The desk lamp flickered to life when I turned it on, casting a soft, warm glow across the wooden surface. Dust floated through the beam like tiny drifting stars. My knees creaked a little as I sat. Age does that, announces itself in the body long before it touches the mind. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one I had avoided for years. Inside were 2 envelopes, a binder, and a folder I had placed there the day I left the restaurant. I had promised myself I'd never open them again. Back then all I wanted was peace. I wanted distance. I wanted a life that didn't revolve around betrayal. But peace without closure is just quiet suffering. I lifted the binder first. The edges were worn and the spine bent from use. I ran my hand over the cover, feeling the faint imprint of the restaurant's old logo, a design my sister replaced just like she tried to replace me. Inside the binder were copies of tax filings, equipment replacement forms, and maintenance approvals from the years when everything ran smoothly. When I ran things, the pages smelled faintly of ink and old paper. I turned each page slowly, reading not to remember but to observe. I looked for what she had destroyed, what she had ignored, what she had been hiding. Then halfway through the binder, my fingers stopped on a sheet with a red stamp. Transfer of management rights. Date 9 years ago. I remembered that day. My mother's hand pressing firmly on my shoulder. My sister crying dramatically at the dining room table. My father insisting this was best for the family. A transfer I never wanted. A transfer I never fought. A transfer they never expected me to question. I closed the binder. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I suddenly felt a deep certainty spreading through my chest, like warm water filling a cold basin. Something was very, very wrong in that restaurant. I reached for the first envelope. Inside were old receipts, dated, itemized, organized. My handwriting on some, hers on others. I had kept them for tax records back then, but now they told a different story. Inconsistencies, unexplained increases, missing entries. One receipt caught my eye. A supplier invoice from last year, after she took full control. It was for an amount far higher than usual. I frowned. My sister was many things, arrogant, careless, self-absorbed, but she wasn't stupid. Overcharging meant one of 2 things. She was being taken advantage of, or she was hiding something. I placed the receipt aside. Next, I opened the second envelope. This one was heavier, fuller. Inside were photocopies of letters I had nearly forgotten. Warnings from inspectors about broken equipment, notes from the city about permits needing renewal, and one letter in particular that made my throat tighten. A letter addressed to me, not her. One that arrived after I stepped away. One she clearly kept from me. Final notice. Unpaid property taxes. I stared at the bold print, my pulse slowing rather than speeding up. Not shock. Not panic. Just understanding. This wasn't a new problem. This wasn't recent. This had roots, years of roots, that she tried to bury under arrogance and cosmetic renovations. As I spread the documents across the desk, the lamplight illuminated the truth I'd been too tired to face before. The restaurant wasn't thriving. It wasn't expanding. It wasn't stable. It was sinking. And she had no idea how to save it. I leaned back in my chair, the old cushion sighing beneath me. My hands felt warm, almost steady, as if the years of being dismissed and overlooked were finally aligning into something clear, something sharp, something inevitable. I reached for my laptop. It took only a few minutes to log into the county records website. I typed the restaurant's address slowly, carefully, feeling my breath deepen as the page loaded. Parcel information appeared. Payment records. Owner history. Status notifications. One word flashed repeatedly across the screen. Delinquent. My eyes skimmed down the page. And then I saw it. Scheduled for silent auction. Date 32 days from now. Silent. Anonymous. Sealed bid. No public announcements. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't hitch. Instead, I felt an eerie calm settle inside me, an old, familiar quiet I used to feel before solving a problem no one else could fix. This was an opportunity. Not created by me. Not forced by me. But delivered to me by her own negligence. I clicked on the auction details. The requirements were simple. Proof of identity. A minimum deposit. A sealed offer submitted before the deadline. Easy. Almost too easy. I whispered into the empty room, she's going to lose everything. The desk lamp hummed, a low vibration in the quiet air. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the window, and for a moment, I felt the weight of the future shifting. She had called me worthless. She had taken my life's work. She had erased me from the place I built. But she didn't know I had kept everything. Every document. Every letter. Every receipt. And now those forgotten papers were turning into something more powerful than anything she owned. I closed the browser and pulled the documents into neat stacks. My joints ached as I leaned forward, not from age but from the pressure of years finally realigning. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash. I didn't answer. Not tonight. Instead, I let it ring out, the sound fading into the halls of my quiet home. Another message came through, this time a text from my sister. Why were you here today? Not a question. A fear. I didn't reply. Instead, I placed the phone face down and returned to the documents. Everything she tried to hide. Everything she tried to control. Everything she thought she owned. She was losing grip of all of it. And she had no idea how close the ending really was. As I gathered the papers into a folder, I felt a strange strength rise inside me. Not revenge, not yet, but something colder. Clarity. I wasn't going to destroy her. She had done that herself. I was simply going to be there. Right at the moment she realized it. And that night, as I pressed the folder closed and turned off the lamp, I whispered into the dark. Hard times have already started. And I knew deep in my bones that nothing would ever be the same again. Those were the last words I whispered into the dark the night before. And they followed me the next morning like a shadow that finally knew where it belonged. When I woke, my house felt different. Not brighter, not warmer. Just clearer, as if the walls themselves had finally exhaled after holding their breath for too many years. I made my tea the way I always did, strong, hot, no sugar, and sat by the kitchen window as dawn slowly spread across the sky. The street outside was quiet except for the soft hum of early traffic and the occasional bark of the neighbor's dog. My tea steamed against the cold glass. There was no rush. No panic. No questioning myself. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The stack of documents from the night before sat neatly on the corner of the kitchen table. As I reached for them, a small tug pulled at my chest. Not hesitation, but something like grief, the soft ache of realizing you're stepping into a chapter that can never be closed again. I placed my hand on top of the folder and whispered, "It's time." My old laptop warmed my thighs as I opened it again and navigated to the county auction site. The timer at the top of the page told me everything. Sealed bids close in 11 hours 43 minutes. I had planned to gather everything today. Double-check. Triple-check. Think it through again. But the quiet confidence inside me said that overthinking was how I lost the restaurant the first time. Not this time. I opened a new email and sent a message to my attorney. A woman who had helped me years ago in ways my family never knew. I explained only what she needed to know. The auction, the urgency, the documents I had already gathered, and the offer amount I intended to submit. Her reply came faster than I expected. "I'll handle it. Come by my office before noon with your identification and signature." No questions. No judgment. No hesitation. Exactly the kind of help I needed. By 9:15 a.m. I was dressed, folder in hand, stepping into the crisp morning air. The cold bit gently at my cheeks as I walked to my car. My breath rose in soft clouds. And for the first time in years I felt something I thought age had taken from me. Purpose. My hands didn't shake when I drove. The streets passed smoothly beneath my wheels, each turn familiar, each stoplight a small pause that allowed my thoughts to settle like soft dust on a quiet shelf. When I reached the attorney's office, the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Taylor. She's expecting you." I nodded, following the familiar hallway. The carpet felt softer than usual. The buzzing overhead lights seemed quieter. Or maybe I was simply hearing the world differently today. My attorney stood when I entered. "Let's get started," she said gently. We reviewed everything: the auction requirements, the property ID, the minimum bid, the conditions. She walked me through each line. I listened carefully, absorbing every word, asking questions when needed but never wavering in my decision. When it came time to write the check for the deposit, she paused and looked at me. "You know what this means if you win," she said softly. "This won't be simple." I met her gaze. "Nothing in my life has been simple," I replied. "This is the first thing that feels right." She studied me for a moment before nodding, sliding the documents across the desk for my signature. My name flowed across each page with steady strokes. My old wedding band glinted faintly under the fluorescent lights as I signed. Then, with a quiet final click of her computer mouse, she submitted the sealed bid. It was done. A strange silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, not afraid to fall but curious what the view looked like from the other side. Back in my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just held the steering wheel lightly and let the moment sink into me. After all these years, after all the humiliation, after watching my sister take what was mine and twist it into something unrecognizable, I was finally standing on the path back home. Not to the past. Not to old wounds. But to something I had built with my own hands. Something she could never replace. Before driving off, I checked my phone. There were 3 unread messages from my sister. Message 1, "Are you ignoring me?" Message 2, "You're acting strange." Message 3, "Call me now." I moved all 3 to a new folder and labeled it for later. I didn't delete them. Fear is a fragile thread. You don't cut it too early. You let it stretch. I drove home slowly, letting the heater blow warm air across my knuckles. My fingers ached slightly from the cold and from gripping the pen earlier, but the ache felt good, like proof of movement after years of standing still. When I reached my house, the sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across my porch. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and old pine furniture. I placed the folder back on the table and sat down, my bones humming with a quiet awareness. The building, my building, was now just a matter of time. I cupped my hands around my mug of fresh tea, letting the warmth seep into my palms. The steam blurred the edges of the room, softening the corners of my thoughts. I didn't think about the restaurant. I didn't think about the staff. I didn't even think about my sister. Instead, I thought about the moment the confirmation email would arrive. What it would feel like to see my name listed as the property owner. Not as the manager. Not as the one who built it. Not as the forgotten sister. But as the rightful owner. I spent the next hours organizing the house, folding laundry, watering plants, dusting picture frames. Ordinary tasks. Quiet tasks. But each one helped keep my mind steady as I waited. Around 3:10 p.m. I sat again at the kitchen table, fingertips grazing the rim of my mug. Then I heard it. The soft, chiming notification from my laptop. I didn't rush. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I simply stood, walked to the desk and opened the email. Subject: Auction award confirmation. My breath eased out in a slow, steady wave. The words were clear, neat, absolute. Congratulations. Your bid has been accepted. The room didn't spin. My heart didn't race. Tears didn't fall. Instead, I felt a stillness so profound it rooted me to the floor. A deep, quiet knowing that I had taken something back that was always mine. My hands gently touched the screen as if confirming it was real. I whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, but to every version of myself that had survived long enough to see this moment. The building was mine. Legally. Fully. Irrevocably. And none of them. Not my sister. Not my mother. Not a single person who betrayed me. Knew it. Yet. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I drove to the restaurant. Not to confront anyone, not yet. I just wanted to see it. One last time before the truth changed everything. The parking lot was half full, the dusk light casting long shadows across the faded lines. I stepped out of the car slowly, inhaling the familiar scent of fried onions drifting through the cold air. I walked the sidewalk, each step steady and quiet. I didn't go inside. Not tonight. Instead, I stood across the street watching the lights flicker inside the dining room. Customers chatting. Servers rushing. My sister pacing behind the counter. She had no idea. No hint. No warning. The building she stood in, the one she stole from me, no longer belonged to her. I let the truth settle into my bones, warm and solid. Tomorrow would begin the unraveling. Tomorrow the fear in her eyes would return. Tomorrow everything she thought she controlled would slip through her fingers. But tonight I allowed myself a small, private smile. Because without a single argument, without raising my voice, without stepping foot inside, I had taken back what was mine. And she didn't even know it yet. That thought stayed with me long after I left the restaurant that night. It echoed softly through my mind the way distant church bells sometimes hum in the winter air, steady, low, and impossible to ignore. When I woke the next morning, the sky was still dim, the edges of the world painted with early gray light. I sat up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness of age in my hips, but my spirit felt strangely weightless. Today was the day. Not the final day. Not the day everything collapsed. But the day the unraveling finally began. I dressed in quiet, simple clothes. A soft sweater, dark slacks, a coat thick enough to keep out the February cold. My hands moved with calm precision as I gathered the documents onto the table. The official ownership transfer, the property registration, the management notifications, and the letter from the county confirming the eviction timeline. I touched the corner of each page gently, making sure they were aligned. Even paper deserved dignity on a day like this. The sun pushed slowly through the blinds as I slipped the stack into a neat folder. My throat tightened, not with doubt but with the heavy awareness of what this day meant. Years of silence. Years of pretending. Years of swallowing my hurt so my family could keep believing their version of the story. Today reality would meet them at the door. I stepped outside, feeling the cutting chill of winter across my cheeks. My breath formed small clouds that drifted upward before disappearing. As I drove, the city slowly awakened around me. Shops unlocking their doors, schoolchildren waiting at bus stops, steam rising from vents along the sidewalks. By the time I reached the restaurant, it was 11:52 a.m., just before the lunch rush. The parking lot was already filling up. The sign above the entrance flickered twice, as if uncertain whether it had the strength to stay lit. I walked toward the door with steady steps. Each footfall on the concrete felt like a drumbeat inside me, quiet but firm. When I pushed the glass door open, a soft bell chimed overhead, and the warmth of the restaurant washed over me like a wave of old memories. For a moment, the scent of garlic bread and roasted chicken transported me back to the years when that smell meant pride. Back when customers lined up outside because they trusted what I created. Before everything went wrong. Before they replaced me. Today I walked in not as the forgotten sister, but as the owner. No one in the dining room noticed me at first. A young server rushed past with a tray full of drinks, mumbling, "Excuse me," without looking up. The chef shouted something from the kitchen about a broken burner. A couple near the window laughed over shared soup. Life was moving as usual. Until she saw me. My sister stood behind the counter, tapping angrily on a receipt printer that seemed stuck. Her hair was pulled back too tightly and the strain showed on her forehead. The moment her eyes lifted and met mine, her entire body froze. It was the kind of stillness that happens when someone senses danger but doesn't yet know the form of it. "What are you doing here again?" she whispered, too stunned for volume. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stepped closer, stopping only when I reached the counter. I placed the folder gently, deliberately, on the smooth wooden surface between us. The sound felt louder than it should have. A soft thud. A soft ending. Her gaze flicked to the folder, then back to me. "What is that?" she asked, though part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. "Documents," I replied evenly. She reached for the folder with hesitant fingers, as if touching it might burn her. She opened it, and the moment her eyes landed on the first page, her lips parted slightly. Not a gasp, not a cry, just a small, broken inhale. Her hands trembled. She blinked hard. And then her jaw clenched. She tried to speak, but the words tangled uselessly in her throat. The dining room continued around us, blissfully unaware that her world had just shifted by an inch that would soon become a chasm. I didn't push her. I didn't rush her. I just watched. Finally, she whispered, This can't be right." I leaned forward just slightly, keeping my voice calm and slow, the way women my age learn to steady themselves when facing storms. "It's official," I said. Everything has been processed. Her eyes darted across the page again, reading the words she could no longer ignore. Property owner, Margaret Taylor. The name she spent years trying to erase. Her breathing quickened. She reached for the next page, then the next. Each document struck her like a wave hitting a fragile shore. With every line she read, the color drained further from her face. I could almost see the exact moment she understood. Her hands slipped from the folder. She pressed her palms flat on the counter to steady herself, but her fingertips curled as if trying to grip something, to hold on to something that was already gone. "How?" she whispered hoarsely. "Did you do this?" I didn't answer. It wasn't time for that. This moment wasn't about explanations. It was about truth. She swallowed hard, eyes filling with tears that she tried desperately to blink away. She glanced toward the hallway, toward the kitchen, toward the staff milling about. Anywhere but at me. "What am I supposed to do now?" she breathed. Her voice cracked on the last word. And then, as though the weight of all the lies she'd carried finally pressed down too hard to bear, the first tear slid down her cheek. She quickly wiped it with the back of her hand, hoping no one saw. But tears are honest things. They rarely obey pride. I said nothing. I let silence speak for me. One of the servers approached timidly. "Is everything okay?" she asked. My sister snapped. "Just go. Please." The girl flinched, then hurried away, casting a confused look over her shoulder. My sister pressed both palms to her temples, breathing unevenly. When she finally looked at me again, her expression had changed. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. Soft. Raw. Unfiltered. "You can't do this," she whispered. "This restaurant. This is everything I have." My voice remained gentle. "I know." She shook her head desperately, tears spilling now without restraint. "No, you don't understand," she said. "Mom will be furious. The staff, the customers. What am I supposed to tell them? I'm not ready for this." She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to the air, to herself, to the collapsing world she built on borrowed time. I watched her unravel quietly, without satisfaction, without mockery, without triumph. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was this, quiet truth presented with steady hands. She picked up one of the pages again, her fingers trembling violently now. She stared at it as if the ink itself might change if she willed it hard enough. "I can fix the bills," she stammered. "I'll call the vendors. I'll talk to the bank. It's already done," I said softly. Her shoulders fell. For the first time since we were children, she looked small. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone who had spent her whole life relying on the illusion of control. Her whisper cracked into a cry. "Please, don't do this to me." I felt the ache in those words. Not because I pitied her, but because they carried the weight of years she refused to acknowledge. Years she chose to forget. "You did this," I said softly. "Not me." She closed her eyes, and for a long moment she didn't move. She simply stood there, one hand clutching the counter, the other pressed over her heart as if to keep it from collapsing. When she finally opened her eyes again, they glistened with tears she no longer tried to hide. "What happens now?" she asked. I lifted the folder, tapped it lightly, and slid it back across the counter. "We'll discuss next steps," I said. "When you're calm." She broke again, shoulders shaking, breath shuddering, tears falling freely now. The staff watched from a distance, unsure, uneasy, sensing a shift they couldn't yet name. I stepped back, giving her space, letting the truth settle into every crack she spent years trying to hide. Her tears didn't stop. Not when I turned toward the door. Not when I walked past the staff. Not when the bell chimed above me on my way out. Her tears had started the moment I walked in with the papers. And deep down she knew. They weren't going to stop anytime soon. Her tears were still glistening on the counter when I stepped out into the cold afternoon air. The door closed behind me with a soft chime, but her broken voice lingered in my ears like a trembling echo. I didn't rush to my car. I didn't look back. I simply wrapped my coat around myself and let the winter wind carry the weight of the moment across my shoulders. I had handed her the truth. Now she would have to live inside it. The sky was a pale blue, almost washed out, as if the world itself had paused to witness what came next. I drove home in silence, my hands steady on the steering wheel. The ache in my chest wasn't sadness. It wasn't guilt. It was the unfamiliar, almost fragile sensation of reclaiming something that had been stolen in plain sight. By the time I reached my driveway, the sun had dipped behind the trees, leaving only streaks of orange and purple stretching across the sky. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, greeted by the soft warmth of my home. For a moment I allowed myself to breathe, long and deep, letting the heaviness inside me settle. This wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was close. An hour later, after a simple dinner and a quiet cup of tea, my phone buzzed. I expected another message from my sister. Another plea, another desperate attempt to reverse what she'd caused. But it wasn't her. It was the county inspector's office. Documents received. Notice delivery scheduled for tomorrow morning. I stared at the screen, absorbing every word. Tomorrow. The unraveling would no longer be private. I nodded to myself and set the phone down. My reflection in the window stared back. Soft lines, silver hair, tired eyes. But for the first time in years, I recognized the woman looking at me. She wasn't the one my family dismissed. She wasn't the sister they replaced. She was the woman who survived them. The next morning, a pale sun filtered through my curtains. I dressed slowly, choosing simple clothes again. There was no need for armor. The truth was armor enough. When I arrived at the restaurant's parking lot, the inspector's white vehicle was already there. A man in a dark uniform held a clipboard in one hand and a large envelope in the other. The official seal glinted in the light. He nodded when he saw me. "I'll post these on the entrance and the back door," he said. "Thank you," I replied. I didn't need to follow him. I didn't need to watch. Instead, I stood by my car and watched customers walk in casually, unaware that today would be different. A few moments later, he returned and offered a respectful nod. "All set. They'll need to vacate immediately." As he drove away, I turned slowly toward the building. My hands warmed inside my coat pockets. A quiet stillness settled around me like the air just before snowfall. Inside the dining room, I saw movement. My sister pacing near the counter, wiping her eyes repeatedly. A server whispered something to her, and she shook her head furiously, hovering between panic and denial. I walked toward the door. The notice was taped directly at eye level. Property transfer complete. Tenant must vacate. Effective immediately. The moment I stepped inside, the bell chimed again. The entire room fell quiet, as if the sound itself carried authority. My sister turned toward me. Her face was pale. Her eyes were swollen. A paper trembled in her hand, the inspection notice she must have just pulled from the door. "You," she began, then stopped, voice catching. They said we have to leave. Today." Her voice cracked on the last word. I walked closer, my steps slow, steady, deliberate. She backed away slightly, clutching the paper like a lifeline. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "It has to be. It can't be real." "It is," I replied. The chef stepped out of the kitchen. A server abandoned the register. The room filled with the soft shuffle of staff gathering around us, uncertain and afraid. My sister looked at them, then back at me. "You're really doing this?" she asked, voice breaking. "No," I said quietly. "You did this." Her lips trembled. She pressed a hand to her forehead as if trying to hold herself together. "I can fix this," she whispered. "I can make it right. Just give me time." I tilted my head slightly. "I gave you 10 years, I said. You used every one of them to push me further away." She flinched. Her shoulders sagged, her breath coming out in uneven shivers. One of the servers, Angela, the girl with the braid, stepped forward hesitantly. "What do we do?" she asked softly. I turned to her and spoke gently. "You'll be paid for the full week. After that, I'll meet with each of you. No one will be left without help." Relief washed over her features, but confusion remained. That soft, uncertain confusion that comes when the ground shifts beneath your feet. My sister suddenly grabbed my sleeve. "Please," she whispered, tears spilling fresh. "Don't take this from me. It's all I have left." Her touch didn't anger me. It didn't soften me either. It simply reminded me of the years she treated me like a shadow, an afterthought in a story she believed belonged only to her. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then slowly lifted my arm away. "You didn't lose this today," I said softly. "You lost it the moment you chose pride over honesty." Her face crumpled. The staff began quietly packing boxes, Stacks of menus, folded aprons, jars of utensils. The clatter of dishes and the size of cardboard shifting filled the air. The reality of the moment spread through the room like slow-moving fog. I didn't bark orders. I didn't demand anything. I simply stood there as the owner, present, steady, unshakable. My sister's sobs grew quieter as she helped fold linens and gather her personal items from the office. Her hands shook so hard she kept dropping things: a pen, a notebook, a framed picture. At one point she crouched down to pick up the frame, and for a brief moment her eyes closed as if the weight was too much. When she opened them again, her gaze found mine. "You really won," she whispered. I shook my head gently. "It wasn't a competition," I replied. "It was survival." She didn't argue. She couldn't. She stood, wiping her cheeks with trembling fingers, and continued packing. 2 hours later, the restaurant was nearly empty. The staff huddled near the door, carrying their boxes, murmuring thanks and uncertainty. I gave each one a small nod, a soft word, a promise that their work would not be forgotten. My sister was the last to leave. She carried a single cardboard box in her arms, her entire decade inside one small container. She hesitated at the entrance, pushing the door open with her shoulder. Her voice came out barely above a breath. "I never thought you'd do this." I met her eyes. "I never thought you'd force me to." She swallowed hard, the fight gone from her completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was too late for forgiveness, but not too late for truth. "I know," I said softly. "But some things cost more than apologies." Her chin trembled. She stepped outside, her tears catching the cold light of afternoon. I watched her walk to her car, each step slow, heavy, defeated. The box bumped against her hip as she fumbled for her keys. She slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, bowing her head against the steering wheel. For a moment I felt the faintest sting behind my eyes, a reminder that even necessary endings still ache. But I didn't look away. Not now. Not after all these years. When her car finally pulled out of the lot, I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The space she left behind felt vast, quiet, and strangely peaceful. I stepped inside the restaurant one last time. The dining room was empty. Light streamed softly across the wooden tables. The walls echoed with memories, some painful, some beautiful, but for the first time since I'd been pushed out, they were mine again. I ran my fingertips along the counter. The same counter where she had once called me worthless. The same counter where she cried this morning. The same counter where truth finally found its voice. I stood tall, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders like dust shaken from an old coat. This wasn't about the building anymore. Or the restaurant. Or the papers. It was about reclaiming the woman I used to be before they convinced me I was nothing. I turned off the lights one by one, leaving the space in quiet twilight. When I stepped out the door and locked it behind me, the click echoed like a final chapter closing neatly on itself. As I walked to my car, the winter wind brushed gently across my face. I inhaled deeply, the cold air filling my lungs with something that felt very much like freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward myself. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had taken back my life. And this time no one would steal it again. Thank you for listening to my story. If this touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe. I share more stories of resilience, truth, and the quiet revenge that women like us know too well.